The flight from cities to rural America is underway, and lots of small towns are looking at those city folk and saying, "You're not welcome here."
We're in Clearwater tonight. I'm Allison Morrow.
Hi, I'm Allison Morrow.
I'm Allison Morrow.
And I've gone to a lot of places.
On St. Pete Beach, Allison Morrow.
And now with my former Force Recon Marine husband, I'm going off-grid-ish.
Hi, I'm Allison Morrow. If you're new to the channel, I was a TV news reporter for almost 13 years, quit my mainstream TV job back in 2019 so that my husband and I could renovate an Airstream, move off-grid-ish in that, and eventually start a family homestead. So we know a little bit about this urban flight syndrome, leaving the big cities for a more simple, quieter life, but we chose to do it about 8 months before a global pandemic and are not part of the flight that is now leaving cities in order to escape the coronavirus. Instead, we actually wanted the lifestyle that the smaller towns afford. And now those small town folks are looking at the city people in a way that they haven't ever before. Not that they didn't look at city folk like a little skeptically before, but now it's like up a notch, because instead of just bringing like the cultural differences, which I say will very real, and when we moved out here definitely experienced people looking at us skeptically based on the area code of our phone numbers, but now it's also like, are you infected with a potentially fatal disease? So the first article I want to show you is from the New York Times. It was published on March 25th, so updated though March 27th, so not too far behind. And the title is, "Governors Tell Outsiders from Hot Zone to Stay Away as Virus Divides States." And if you scroll down, the opening line is, "Florida has a message for New Yorkers. Please don't visit." I have to say, a friend of mine, actually I'm from Florida, so I have a lot of friends there, but one friend in particular was telling me that her neighbors across the street welcomed family from New York not too long ago because of all this, people trying to get out of New York City and get to places where there are fewer cases of COVID-19. And they all got sick while they were there, so now everyone's quarantined, and my friend actually they asked for her to lend them a thermometer, and she's like, "You can keep it. Thanks for asking," and just threw it across the street, essentially, because she didn't want to have contact with them. But it got me thinking, like, what is happening here? Like, people are coming from New York. Obviously, you've heard this before, I'm sure, if you've been paying attention to the news, that there are now travel restrictions and everything because of this, because people are trying to get out of places like New York, where we're seeing these cases of COVID-19 continue to increase, obviously in large part because of the density of the city and how fast people can get infected there. I mean, try to stay 6 feet away from somebody in New York City. It's virtually impossible, even in your own apartment, if you have a roommate especially, because basically all apartments in New York are like 6 feet wide. Now, we did not foresee this particular crisis on the horizon when we made the decision to leave Seattle for rural Washington, but we did see that it would become a possibility at some point in the future. And it was one of the reasons that we decided to leave the city, because cities not only are cesspools for disease, like I used to live in New York City and walking through feces was pretty much like what we called Monday. Secondly, it's really hard to get resources, natural resources in a city that you need to survive. So if you're in a rural area and really like it's hitting the fan, like you can go out and find food, you can find water, you can find a heat source. Those are other reasons. And then finally, like, you can get away from the panic and the hysteria and people take care of each other because there's enough to go around. There isn't this sense of scarcity. And also you just can invest more in your life. But, a global pandemic or an economic meltdown, like those were not things we thought, hey, like let's get the heck out of here right now because this is going to be coming like by, February, March. No, we didn't think that, but we did think at some point in our lifetime, probably there's going to be a situation like this. And that was definitely in the back of our minds when we made the decision to move. So anyway, back to this article. It's interesting because it goes through some of the statements and quarantine rules that the governors have placed on different states, because now we're kind of seeing this being handled in a state by state way, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing for states to figure out their local issues and how they want to sort of self-govern. But it has brought up a little bit of complexity to how to deal with this, as people are not necessarily like forced to stay in their state and can get on the highway and drive. What are you going to do with them? So it says Tuesday, Governor Ron DeSantis, a Florida Republican, signed an executive order requiring a 14-day quarantine of anyone who had arrived from the New York region over the past 3 weeks. So it doesn't matter if you're sick or not. You came from New York, you're quarantined. Sorry, bye. Go inside. And it also says all new arrivals will have to report names of people they have contact with to public health officials so they can trace those people as well. Now, this kind of freaks me out a little bit. I'm not going to lie. Like, I would not, if my brother were coming to visit, I don't live in Florida, but my brother lives in Manhattan, and it would definitely freak me out to have to like register with the government because my brother just came to visit. It's a little bit big brother for me, but I guess I can understand why the states are doing it. The governor of Hawaii, same thing right here. He says that he has also asked travelers to postpone trips for 30 days. Obviously, that's an economy that relies on tourism, and this is a very high season for the Hawaiian economy for tourists. And then one of my favorites is the governor of Alaska, who enacted one of the stricter measures in this country and ordered everyone arriving in Alaska, whether you're visiting or you're from there, to self-quarantine for 14 days, no matter where you came from. And basically, he says, like, if you're a resident, your location to quarantine is your house. And if you're a visitor or a worker, you better just stay in your hotel room. And you know what? Those mountains and the fishing and all those things you thought you were going to do in Alaska, sorry. Like, I hope your trip is at least 3 weeks long, because the first 2 of those are going to be playing games in a hotel room. Florida, of course, had somewhat of an issue not too long ago that was a little bit unique to its state. As a former Florida resident, someone who grew up there, it's called spring break. Maybe you've heard of it. And it's the time when all kinds of people from all over the place crowd to the beaches. My parents actually live on one of the most popular beaches. I grew up there. They found all kinds of nasty stuff in their sand dunes. So I will say one of the winners of the beach closures, where everybody was like going around on television talking about how they didn't care if they got this virus, they were going to go have their volleyball tournament no matter what. At least my parents are now having a quiet backyard with no condoms or plastic bottles or anything strewn all over the place. And I think they're happy about that. But as far as the economy, the restaurants on the beach, all that stuff, of course, this is going to have a really, 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 really big effect. And I feel terrible for those businesses, because I don't know how they recover if this goes on another month or 2 months. I mean, that's the biggest part of the economy in those areas. But let's talk about how this relates to the city flight to rural towns, which is kind of the point of this video. And if you see the headline here in the Sacramento Bee, it says, California tourist towns demand outsiders stay home. Quote, someone is going to get shot. So you scroll down and you see they're talking about this lady, Stacey Corliss, who opened Facebook on Monday and saw someone suggest it was time to start slashing visitors' tires. Now, Stacey lives in Mono County, which is the ski resort community of Mammoth Lake. So if you're familiar with that, that's where a lot of people in California, like the LA area, go skiing. And so they're basically saying that she says she's concerned about the level of vitriol and xenophobia. I am worried someone is going to get shot. You continue to scroll down, and you see that the same issue is happening in the Tahoe area. Tahoe, another small town, but known for skiing. It's actually like a place where a lot of wealthy people go skiing. And kind of the same thing. It's like, hey, our locals have welcomed visitors from around the globe. This is the official Tahoe Visitor Bureau website for North Lake Tahoe. And so, again, it says, our locals have welcomed visitors from around the globe for generations, but right now our community needs the time and space to protect our loved ones and health resources. The Sierra region will be ready to welcome visitors back when the crisis is behind us, but now is the time to stay put. So they're not necessarily pulling people over or anything on the road, but it does say, if you scroll down a little bit further, that one of these people quoted in the article is talking about how there's been discussion of checking IDs on the highway, which is the main entrance into town. I think it's really interesting that these small towns are willing to sacrifice an economy based on tourism at a time like this, because there are certain seasons where they have to make a lot of money to get them through the lower times. But as you see in this final article I'm going to show you, again from the Sacramento Bee, the title is "California's Rural Hospitals Can't Handle a Coronavirus Wave. Quote, people will die, doctor warns." And that's kind of the sentiment that I think a lot of the small town articles that I'm seeing are referencing, that basically like, hey, if they can't handle it in New York City, then we may have far fewer people out here, but we also have far fewer resources. Our hospitals don't have anywhere near the kind of bed space, and that's essentially what they're saying in this article. Like, this Mammoth Hospital chief medical officer said that he urged the 8,234 people living in the Sierra ski resort town to stay home and avoid crowds. And if 100 people got sick all at once tomorrow, it would be a really big problem. Basically, he says if that happens, our small hospital, our small community will be completely overwhelmed and people will die. Let me say that again. People will die. So not mincing words there for that guy. And I will just give you a few little anecdotes from our town. I was talking to one of the cashiers at the grocery store about a week and a half ago, and she told me that they're getting calls from people in the Seattle area, which is another hotspot for this virus in the United States. We had the first death in the United States in the Seattle area. And they're coming over here to buy toilet paper and the stuff they can't get over in the city. And so we don't have any of those supplies. So besides the fact that it's becoming an issue because the health risks from over on that side of the mountains are now being brought over here, we also only have one grocery store here, and we have folks that don't want to wait in line at one of 80,000 Costco's on the Seattle side of the mountains, and so they come over to our one grocery store and take the last remaining roll of toilet paper, which does start to get kind of annoying for people who already lived out here and are actually not really panicking. I gotta say, one of the big differences that I've noticed in our small town is maybe it has to do with just people banding together as neighbors, maybe because social distancing is not that big of an issue, and maybe it's because we're not constantly faced with newspaper headlines that are freaking us out or television broadcasts. The internet's really slow out here. I mean, people just aren't as connected, I think, to the media side of things because they're out shoveling horse crap and feeding hay and working on their barns and their sheds and welding and things like that. And so people aren't just hooked to their screens all day long. So I think there's probably a little bit less panic in the rural areas, at least in our area that I found. But I do think there has been a little bit of an increase in that, I don't know, just that sort of you're not from around here, are you kind of attitude, because it's if we weren't good enough when times were good, you didn't want to come out here and live this kind of way on your 10 acres where you had to deal with the Wi-Fi issues and maybe the bad cell reception and you have to drive a little further to your favorite restaurant. If you didn't want that lifestyle before this, then why are you coming out here right now? A valid point that I think people in small town America make when it comes to this urban flight syndrome is that people in the cities want to leave the bad part of city living for the plus side of rural life, but then they end up turning the small towns into the big towns and ruin all of the good things that everybody loves about living in rural America. I can already see this happening where we live because folks in the Seattle area are getting sick of the taxes, of the traffic, of all the regulation, and so they're like, well, if I'm going to spend 90 minutes on I-5, I might as well move to the other side of the mountains and commute 90 minutes in the opposite direction and have better real estate values and lower taxes and less regulation. But then they won't take the good with the bad of rural living, the adversity that comes with rural living, which a lot of people out here enjoy. So they want the best of both worlds. And then unfortunately, what ends up happening is that the small towns end up losing their charm to the big town ideology because the city people don't really want to be the country people. They just want the plus side of country living, but they want also sort of the amenities and comforts comforts of city living, which in a lot of ways come with like bigger government and control and the stuff that people in rural America want to get away from. But I will say, I think this is going to start getting people to reevaluate where they live. Maybe not anywhere near the majority of people, but I do think some people are going to sit back and say, okay, wow, this can actually happen. It can actually happen that there's a global viral pandemic. It can actually happen that there is an economic meltdown. It can actually happen that maybe someday I'm going to have to figure out how to heat my own home with wood, or figure out how to get water on my own from a well, or pay bills without a job. Like, how do you do that? What's your skill set if the one job you had doesn't work anymore? Like, what kind of skills do you have to barter with your neighbors? Like, what small tasks can you do that people need? Like, can you fix plumbing? Can you fix roofs? Like, do you have any actual real skill sets to offer anybody? And when a time of crisis comes along, like in a rural area, there are actual handy jobs that you can do to make ends meet. Like, that's definitely something that my husband has been asked to do, and I've seen like our neighbors kind of swapping, like, you're a rancher and you have meat, and you're a welder and you know how to weld. Hey, like, let's get together and make things happen. And that's something you have a lot more availability and option to do in a rural town. But I do think that probably the best option is to think about this not when everybody is hysterical and there's a potential risk of infecting people with a somewhat, sometimes, I guess, fatal disease, and stay put until you can safely move to a rural area, and don't bring sickness and your issues of infecting people to the rural areas. And also, please stop taking our toilet paper, because we really don't have enough for the entire state at our one grocery store. If you are somebody who has been thinking about, hey, I live in a 15-story building with like hundreds of other people, and we have air that circulates around, and I can't get away from anybody if I tried, and you're like, you know what, maybe walking out and feeling grass under my feet wouldn't be such a bad thing, then I don't know, maybe this is the time to evaluate where you live, how you live. And I gotta say, it's been a great transition for us, because we've had the opportunity to really invest in our own daily lives, from taking care of our animals to hopefully in the near future growing our own food and just being more connected to our neighbors. There are a lot of positives to rural living, and it would be nice if it wasn't just something that, city people were looking at as a flight from the impending apocalypse, but we're choosing because it has value in and of itself on even a regular day. Again, I'm Allison Morrow. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up, hit that bell icon for notifications when I upload a new video, and please share this video with folks you think might like it. It really does help me get my videos out there in front of people, because YouTube sometimes censors and shadow bans and thinks people that talk about rural living or whatever, I don't know, maybe we're kooky and they just don't like it. But I've had a couple videos demonetized and censored, and so it just helps when people share the content. If you're interested in more videos, of course, there's one up above my left shoulder and my right shoulder, so you can click on that and watch to your heart's content. I'll see you next time. Bye.